Pilot, what is our estimated time of arrival for Paradisus Melis?
Approximately 3 hours now that we've exited the warp, Lord Inquisitor.
Good. With any luck, the Melis Contumaciae chapter of Adeptus Astartes will be as favorable as the Space Bees were to my presence.
The Badges of Defiance, actually, my lord.
I beg your pardon?
Well, that's what they're called by the locals. The Space Badges is another, but the chapter itself seems to favor the full title.
Interesting. The first discrepancy in the chapter's grimoire records. May I ask how you know this?
Well, you see, my lord, I'm from Paradisus Melis. I grew up a member of a tertiary house of House Arton.
Well, that's a spectacular coincidence given my objective.
Hardly, my lord. The Space Beast chose me as your pilot given I was a native of Paradisus Melis, though this will be the first time I've been home since I was 16. And before you ask, my lord, I'm afraid I don't know too much about the internal makeup of the chapter. You're gonna have to put in the legwork there yourself, I'm afraid.
Indeed. I hope I can rely on you for the civilian perspective of the chapter, then.
Of course, sir. Always happy to help.
Inquisitor Grevik's third personal log entry and 7th overall. What follows is a detailed account of the Badges of Defiance chapter of Adeptus Astartes, a 10th founding chapter on the fringe edges of the Imperium's territory. As I denote these findings, I must say that I've been struggling these past 2 weeks with the chapter, not due to malicious treatment on behalf of the chapter, but due to their planet's conditions. Paradisus Melis is by all accounts a death world, and has earned this classification in spades. Not too dissimilar to worlds such as Catachan, its surface is swarming with varying species of violent predators, nearly all of which are a match for an Astartes. And as if that were not enough of a struggle for Imperial citizens, the planet's gravity is also much heavier than that of Terra, resulting in my personal struggle to adapt long enough to conduct my charge. I shudder to think if the planet would even be possible to colonize if the surface was the chosen domain of the local human populace. Which leads me to elaborate upon the hardened local society which has formed in such a world. The people of Paradisus Melis are hardy and robust. In fact, I would say they encapsulate such descriptors. They are shorter in stature and much bulkier than the average human, more comparable to squats if anything, though they are somewhat taller than that. Due to the planet's conditions, the locals have much denser bone structures, thick skin, and a hardy disposition. And all of this comes quite in handy as they all reside in subterranean territories, as a way to avoid the worst of the surface creatures, and to best profit off of the planet's key resource, minerals. The Paradisians have formulated a local culture of noble houses established around occupational specialties of mineral harvesting. There are 12 overall, however I only had the pleasure of encountering and learning of a few of them, such as House Arton, which specializes in mining iron, and copper, or House Narto, who specialize in gold and silver. Both houses had governance over massive underground cities where their whirring of industry could be heard day in and day out. Whether it had been the clang of metal on stone, the growling roar of drilling teams, or the factories crackling and bellowing with the refinement of ore into countless useful products, I couldn't help but inquire with the locals on their way of life, and of course, on their views of both the Imperium and the Astartes.
Well, of course, we loyal and proud members of the Imperium are all too pleased to provide a generous tithe to the war effort against the Xenos filth as well as heretics. But I'd be lying if I said that's the only avenue in which our ores and crafts go. We also make a profit selling refined goods to other neighboring worlds and, of course, rogue traders. Now, as for the Astartes, I can't speak to every chapter, but the Badgers have earned our reverence and loyalty 1,000,000 times over. They protect us from the beasts atop the surface, and of course give the Xenos what for when they come crawling down their own caves. Though their most regular fight is with them steel brethren, Chaos Weapons and traitor Space Marines. They show up all the time trying to besiege the fortress Monastery, and they've never succeeded. Ha!
Of course, this finally leads my log to its intended archival nature of the local chapter of Astartes. The Badgers, as I will abbreviate them, were a struggle to even traverse to, given the complex labyrinth of tunnels I was led through by a local representative. I'd wager the locals, as well as the chapter themselves, had these systems of tunnels much to thank for the failed attempts at foreign entities invading their world. Along the route, I was held back by the representative. Cardo was his name, as I recall. He brought us to a halt due to the sound of rock crumbling and stone bursting forth into the open tunnel we at the time resided in. What I thought to be a massive terraforming machinery, adding yet another tunnel to the web, revealed itself to be a massive creature that strongly resembled, well, a honey badger from ancient Terra.
That be a badger gigantica. Yes, I know we might as well just call them big fucking badgers, but everything's got to sound fancy, eh? Well, they live under the ground just like we do. In fact, it's believed ancient settlers that first set foot on this rock brought terror-born species of animals, obviously including honey badgers, and they quickly adapted to the planet and evolved into monstrosities such as those. On average, though, that one is bigger than average. They grow up to be about 12 feet in length, 7 feet shoulder height, while they're on all fours. They live in small families of only 5, maybe 8 at most. They usually don't bother us too much. In fact, the Astartes I'm taking you through are known to turn them into fucking pets and steeds. What a lively place down here, eh?
After we allowed the family of giant badgers to pass, we continued on our way to the fortress monastery. After a few days' travel, we finally arrived at the Steel Mound, the fortress monastery of the Badgers of Defiance. As the name suggests, the fortress was a mountainous mound of thick rock like walls and dense metals. Signs of battle damage dotted the outer wall, some old scars, some others much more recent. However, despite the size of the blast markings, there appeared few, if any, true abrasions to the wall. It seemed like those it housed. It was not easily moved or broken, no matter the abuse. I parted ways with the representative and entered the facility after being made to wait an hour in front whilst 2 of the Astartes stared at me, unflinchingly. Given the dark grey of their armor alongside this rigid stance, one could be forgiven for mistaking them as statues. I later learned that the shade of grey that adorns the badger's armor denotes age amongst their ranks. The darker, the more ancient. After an hour passed, the massive thick doors of the fortress opened. As they did, the very caves I stood in shook with the scraping of the ancient gate. Once inside, I immediately began my archival process in earnest. The chapter's head librarian was assigned to me, and I learned much from him. He went by the name Acris, and appeared somewhat shamanistic, as his ceramite armor was decorated with runes and symbols, and a fur cape draped over his shoulders. Acris welcomed me and answered all of my questions thoroughly as I spent the remainder of my second week in the fortress, traversing its halls, interacting briefly and to the point with many a marine, and listening about for news of the chapter's notable figures or operations. Little was gleaned from simply listening in, so direct inquiries with Acris were the best solution oftentimes. The ancient psyker told me the tale of the chapter in full. According to Acris, the Badgers of Defiance came about from the Imperial Fist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, that of course meaning Rogel Dawn was their gene-sire. They are a 10th founding chapter born about the Nova Terra Intergenum, or as many recall it, the time of twin empires, when the Ur Council rebelled against the High Lords of Terra. The Imperial Fist received a distress call, whilst in the neighboring system of Paradisus Melis, from the planet as it was under siege by the newly established Iron Warriors' successor warband, known as the Steel Brethren. The Imperial Fist engaged the warband, aiding the local populace in establishing defensible infrastructure during the several-year-long campaign against them. After a long-fought war, the Fist succeeded in repelling the Steel Legion from the planet. However, they were unable to wipe them out completely. Thus, the chapter of the Imperial Fist gave consent for the standing troops already upon the planet to establish a new successor chapter for the sake of the system. As the Badger Giganticus incidentally aided the Fists with the warfare as the campaign went subterranean, the Astartes, in honor and respect to the creatures, christened themselves the Badgers of Defiance. Over time, the vast majority of the chapter has become encompassed by the local populace that have become Space Marines, with only a spare few remaining from the remnants of their Imperial Fist roots. However, the chapter's culture seems to have not wandered far from its roots, regardless of its changing of the guard. I safely assume this can be credited to Acris and the few Imperial Fist alumni's efforts to teach the younger members of the histories of Fists and instill their values to them. Whilst traversing the fortress, we came about the chapter's barracks, where I witnessed the Battle Brothers training in earnest, and sparring in hand-to-hand combat. As the warriors were bare-chested, I was able to make out a tattoo on several of them, that of a tribal-styled badger head. Given its repeated use amongst them, I inquired with Acris about its representation. According to the Lord Librarian, the tattoo represents veteran status, an acknowledgement of the Battle Brothers' staunch bravery and fortitude even in the face of the most vicious beasts. One final thing I experienced while amongst the chapter was the meeting of their chapter master, Corritus Arton. Corritus was a massive brute of a man, even for an Astartes. When I initially encountered him, he was in his private chambers, performing exercise drills in seclusion. When I and the librarian entered, he just finished a round of push-ups and with weights added to his back. He ceased once he heard us enter and allowed the weights to fall from his back. They landed with an immense thud, and the stone-like floor cracked with their landing. He stood tall, his bare back towards us, covered in healing lacerations and old defined scars. When he turned to face us, his front was no better. In fact, it was even more scarred. Old bullet holes and puncture scars healed over awkwardly. Deep scars across his chest, abdomen, and arms. His face was not spared this damage, as a large old slash scar decorated his face from lower right cheek to just below his left eye. His hair was neck length and grey, with a long bushy beard covering his no doubt chiseled jawline and trailing down to just above his pectorals. The man was an 8-foot beast in human-like form, and emanated an aura of piercing aggression and command. Though I have never met a Custodes, I easily pictured them through this Astartes.
So, little Inquisitor, you wish to know of my chapter and its standing?
Yes, my lord, of course. I'm here on behalf of...
Why?
Why, sir? Well, the Inquisition discovered ancient archives of...
I don't recall asking for what inspired the Inquisition to send you. Emperor only knows why they do half of what they do. I'm asking why you are here, and why you are fit to determine a chapter's standing.
Well, my motivations are simple, my lord. I saw this as an opportunity of no equal, to encounter all of the little-known chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, and record for the Imperium your legendary status is an honor without equal.
And you think the Inquisition will make any of your findings public? Let alone care for whatever flavoring you may write in the margins? I thought Inquisitors were supposed to be smart. Your mission is solely to weed out possible traitors and uncover information under which the Inquisition can posture itself to use as blackmail and manipulate a power they have not and cannot feasibly control. The Astartes.
I was at a complete loss for words at this pronouncement. As much as I wanted to scream how he was wrong and spit at his boisterous words, I could not. It certainly made sense and fit with the Inquisition that I knew, though I suppose I was hoping for a difference in this case. Corritus sighed with annoyance and requested I ignore his previous comments and get on with my questioning. Thus I did without protest. To linger on such a sour reality is unwelcome at the best of times. From there, I learned of the chapter master and his history with the Badges of Defiance. He has been a chapter master for the last 200 years, and has spent his time boldly leading the chapter to countless victories, both on the offensive and defensive. The older Astartes described his countless victories in single combat without a single loss, as well as his personal steed, one of the giant badgers we encountered in the cave tunnels. As he spoke to us, he called forth servitors which aided him into his Mark 8 power armor. After answering my few questions, he took his leave unceremoniously. It seemed I was a distraction at best to him. Acris did his best to cheer me up on the way to my chambers, assuring me that Corritus was not a man to waste time nor dally on the trivialities of social niceties. He states things as he sees them, and nothing more. Overall, my time with the chapter and upon Paradisus Melis has been an interesting one, though I find it ending on a sour note. As much as I would like to say Corritus' statements were pessimistic falsehoods based on dogmatic paranoia, I couldn't help but acknowledge that he has more than likely been correct. It is here I will summarize the chapter in the usual manner. Chapter name, The Badges of Defiance. War cry, Our Claws Shred Evil. Founding, the 10th founding chapter. Primarch, Rogal Dawn. Successors of Imperial Fists. Successor chapters, no known successors. Numbers, I was unable to fully ascertain, but on world there was around 500 to 700, so I have to assume the rest of the 1000 limit are in orbit in ships. The chapter master, Cortus Artun, also known as the Backbone of Defiance. Homeworld, Paradisus Melis. Fortress Monastery, the Mound of Steel. Colors, gray, yellow, and black. Chapter badge, an angry badgerhead. Allegiance, loyalist, of course. Codex compliance, seemingly within no acceptable parameters. Preferred tactics, defensive. Though in offensive encounters they are noted to use tunneling networks and literally undermine enemies and strongholds by tunneling beneath them. And it is here I, Inquisitor Grevik, stamp down my seal of approval. End of log entry.